Golden chandeliers hung above a sea of satin gowns and black suits, their crystal arms catching every flicker of motion. The air smelled of roses and expensive champagne, of power disguised as charm. It was the night of the Manhattan Renaissance Gala, where the city's elite gathered to be seen, to whisper, and to judge. Isabella Hart stepped through the tall glass doors with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to breathe through storms. Her gown was her own creation, soft silver silk that moved like water under moonlight, simple but flawless in every line. It wasn't meant to shout. It was meant to exist beautifully, the way she wished she could. Heads turned as she passed. Not because her name carried weight, but because her presence did. For a moment, she allowed herself to admire the space. 2 years ago, she had stood in the same ballroom beside Lucas Drayton, the man she thought she would marry. Back then, she believed love could make her belong here. Now she knew better. Tonight she wasn't anyone's date or decoration. She was a guest designer for the charity auction. Her work displayed under glass like pieces of her soul. The sound of laughter pulled her back. She didn't have to look to know whose voice it was. Lucas, smooth, confident, perfectly dressed as always. His arm rested around Sophia Lennox, the heiress whose wealth came from hotels and whose tongue had always dripped with sugar-coated cruelty. They were the picture of status. Lucas caught sight of Isabella almost immediately. His smile sharpened. "Well, look who decided to join the big leagues," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Handmade dreams in a designer world. The words slid across the marble floor like oil. A few people laughed politely, others avoided Isabella's eyes. She stood still, her heartbeat drumming in her chest. Years ago, such a moment would have broken her. She had loved him once, his confidence, his charm, the way he made her feel seen. Now that same charm looked hollow, brittle under the weight of arrogance. She smoothed her gown, lifted her chin, and met his gaze with calm steadiness. "Dreams have to start somewhere," she said softly. "Some people build theirs with heart. Others just borrow someone else's." Her voice didn't tremble. Lucas's smirk faltered, and Sophia's hand tightened on his arm. A murmur spread through the group, that quiet ripple of discomfort when cruelty is met with grace. Isabella turned away before he could answer. She walked toward the far side of the room, toward the art installations where her gowns were displayed. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced them to stillness. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Across the room, someone had been watching. Gabriel Cole leaned against a marble pillar, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand. His eyes followed the woman in silver, not out of curiosity, but recognition. He had seen that kind of composure before, the kind people wear only after being broken and rebuilt. Gabriel was not like the others here. He didn't care for gossip or gold. His fortune was self-made, built on quiet intelligence and the kind of discipline that left little room for small talk. He had come tonight because the gala funded one of his city projects, a children's art center. Yet now, his attention had shifted entirely. Lucas noticed the direction of Gabriel's gaze. A muscle in his jaw tightened. The two men had crossed paths before. Brief, professional, cold. Gabriel's presence always made Lucas uneasy. Perhaps because he couldn't understand a man who didn't need approval to feel powerful. Isabella paused near the stage lights, unaware of the storm she had just ignited. The silver fabric of her gown caught the glow and seemed almost luminous against her dark hair. Gabriel's expression softened slightly. He raised his glass in a small, silent gesture. Not a toast, not yet. More like a promise that she wasn't invisible. Not tonight. Lucas turned back to his circle of admirers, laughing too loudly now, his voice forced. But every time he glanced across the room, he saw Gabriel watching, calm, unreadable, unshaken. And for the first time that evening, Lucas Drayton felt something he hadn't expected to feel at all: unease. The kind that comes when you realize the game you've always played might not belong to you anymore. The terrace outside the ballroom glittered beneath the city, lights like a sea of stars waiting to be touched. Laughter from inside drifted out, light and cruel, echoing the kind of mockery that left bruises on pride rather than skin. Isabella gripped the stone railing, her fingers cold against the marble. She could still hear Lucas's voice in her head, smooth and sharp, the way it had once charmed her and now cut her. She told herself to breathe. The night air was crisp, tasting faintly of rain. For a moment, she thought about leaving, just disappearing before anyone could see her trembling. but her heels stayed planted on the ground as if her body refused to let her run again. She had spent too many years running from shame that wasn't hers to carry. Behind her, the door opened with a soft click. Footsteps followed, slow, measured, unhurried. She turned slightly and found the man she had noticed earlier standing a few steps away. He wasn't like the others inside. There was no arrogance in his stance, no hunger in his eyes. He held a champagne flute loosely, his gaze calm and steady, as if he were studying her the way one studies a painting that has just begun to make sense. "You handled that with more grace than most could manage," he said. His voice was deep but quiet, carrying a kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself. "Grace is easier than anger," she replied, her tone dry but not unkind. "It lasts longer," he smiled faintly. "Sometimes anger is necessary, but not tonight, I think." He stepped closer, offering her a clean white handkerchief. She hesitated, then accepted it. Their fingers brushed. A fleeting touch, but enough to spark awareness. "Thank you," she said softly. "Gabriel Cole." He introduced himself, as though she didn't already know the name. Everyone did. The papers called him the quiet millionaire, a man who turned failed companies into thriving foundations. His eyes, up close, were the color of weathered steel. Cool, intelligent, impossible to read. "Isabella Hart," she said, matching his composure even though her heart still raced. He nodded. "The designer whose work is in the auction. I noticed your collection earlier. It doesn't try to impress, it speaks." His words caught her off guard. No one at these events ever talked about art that way. They talked about exposure, profit, branding, never feeling. She studied him for a moment, trying to place his intent, but found no arrogance there. "You noticed my work?" she asked quietly. "I notice what's real," he said simply. "There isn't much of it in there." He gestured toward the ballroom where laughter continued to spill out like broken glass. Isabella let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Lucas doesn't like to lose the spotlight," she murmured. "He never did." Gabriel leaned against the railing beside her. "Men who need to humiliate others usually know how small they really are," he said. "People who laugh at someone else's light are afraid of how bright it is." For the first time that night, she smiled. Small, tired, but real. "That's poetic. It's experience," he answered. His gaze drifted toward the skyline, the lights of the city reflected in his eyes. "The world can be cruel, Miss Hart. But it also remembers kindness. It rewards those who keep their heads high when others try to drag them low." Their silence after that wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around two people who understood loneliness in different languages. Inside, the orchestra began a new piece. Soft piano, melancholic, beautiful. Lucas appeared at the far end of the terrace then, searching for her. He froze when he saw Gabriel standing beside her. His polished smile faltered just for a second. He straightened his cuffs, trying to look unaffected, but something in Gabriel's stillness unnerved him. Gabriel glanced over his shoulder briefly. Their eyes met. Lucas's smug charm against Gabriel's quiet authority. No words were exchanged, but something shifted in the air. Lucas turned back toward the ballroom, jaw tight, pretending he hadn't been dismissed without a sound. Isabella watched him go, a flicker of confusion and disbelief in her eyes. He looked almost nervous, she whispered. Gabriel's lips curved into a subtle smile. Maybe he finally met someone he couldn't impress. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Light, pure, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. Gabriel looked at her, and the expression in his eyes softened. Not with pity, but with something like respect. Inside, the music swelled again, but out here, the night held its breath. Something had shifted, quietly, invisibly, but completely. And for the first time in years, Isabella felt like the storm around her wasn't destroying her anymore. It was clearing the sky. The morning light filtered through tall windows as Isabella stepped into her small studio. The next day, her hands still trembled faintly from the night before she had replayed the gala in her mind. Over and over Lucas's laughter. The whispers. The look on Gabriel's face when he stood beside her like a quiet shield. She didn't know what to make of it. He was a stranger, and yet his presence had felt strangely familiar, like standing near something safe after years of uncertainty. Rolls of silk and sketches surrounded her. The air smelled faintly of fabric dye and jasmine candles. She tried to focus on her new designs, but her thoughts kept drifting to the terrace. His words lingered in her mind. People who laugh at others are terrified. Of silence, that single line had burned through her self-doubt. Like sunlight through fog, her sister Amelia arrived a burst of energy. As always, she tossed her bag onto the sofa and gave her a quick look over. "You look different," she said, softer but stronger. "What happened last night?" Isabella smiled faintly. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Amelia raised a brow. "Please, you went to a room full of people who used to treat you like a mistake." "That's not nothing." Isabella laughed quietly. "I just decided not to hide anymore. If they see me, they see me." But Amelia wasn't convinced. She leaned forward, her tone lowering. "I saw the photos." Isabella froze. "Photos? What photos?" Amelia turned her phone around, and there they were, dozens of images spreading. Online Lucas standing beside his new fiancée, laughing. But in the background, clearly visible, was Isabella on the terrace with Gabriel Cole, their silhouettes framed by city lights. "Who took that?" Isabella whispered. "It doesn't matter," Amelia said, eyes wide. "You're trending. Gabriel Cole's mystery designer, everyone's talking about how he looked at you." Isabella's chest tightened, a swirl of shock and fear. "Why does that sound like trouble?" Meanwhile, across town, Lucas sat in his office. The headlines glowing on his screen, "Mystery Designer Captures Billionaire's Attention." His jaw clenched. Every article mentioned her name next to Gabriel's. People were calling her the rising star of sustainable couture, a woman of vision. Lucas felt something twist inside him, jealousy dressed up as disdain. He slammed the laptop shut. His assistant flinched outside the door. He could hear whispers already spreading. By afternoon, Isabella's phone wouldn't stop buzzing interview requests, offers, invitations. She ignored them all, focusing on her work. She wanted to stay grounded, but the world outside had other plans. When the doorbell rang, she assumed it was a courier. Instead, she found Gabriel Cole standing there holding a cup of coffee and a soft smile. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which they both knew was a lie. Her studio was far from his circles, but she let him in. His eyes moved over her workspace, taking in the chaos with quiet appreciation. "You build beauty out of pieces," he said. "Not polish. Not perfection. That's rare." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. He placed the coffee on her desk and met her eyes. "People will talk about last night," he said evenly. "They already are." She admitted. He nodded. "If they must. Talk. Let them tell the truth. You were remarkable." His words steadied her in a way nothing else could. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease, but there was something behind his calm, something unspoken as he looked around the studio, almost as if he recognized it as a place he once dreamed of when he was still building himself. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression darkened a fraction. "Excuse me?" He stepped aside to take the call. His tone turned, sharp, deliberate. "No," I said. "We don't move forward with Drayton Holdings, not now. Not ever," and hung up. Isabella caught the name Drayton. Her breath stilled. "Was that Lucas?" He turned back to her as if nothing had happened. "Shall we continue our conversation?" She nodded, but her mind was racing. What connection did they have? Outside the window. A flash of lightning split the gray sky. Thunder rolled over the city, and in that moment she realized something. Her story with Lucas wasn't over. Not yet, and whatever link bound him to Gabriel was about to change everything in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the city wrapped in a soft golden haze. As lights began to bloom across Manhattan, Isabella stood in front of her, mirror smoothing the folds of her black evening gown. She had received an invitation that morning, embossed in gold, from the Cole Foundation Gala. It was one of the most exclusive events of the season, and she had no idea why she had been invited. Amelia had begged her to go, saying this was her moment to prove she belonged among the people who once ignored her. But as Isabella looked at her reflection, doubt whispered in the back of her mind. She had spent years learning to be invisible, and now her name was on everyone's lips. A sleek black car arrived outside, and the driver greeted her by name. She was led into the glittering world she thought she had left behind. The same chandeliers, the same polished smiles. Yet tonight, the air carried. A different tension whispers rippled through the crowd when she entered. People turned their heads curious to see the woman who had captured Gabriel Cole's attention. And then she saw him standing near the stage, tall, calm, and composed in a dark, tailored suit. His presence commanded silence, even in a room filled with power. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. He crossed the distance between them with quiet certainty. Taking her hand gently, "Was hoping you'd come," he said. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I didn't think this was my kind of place anymore." "Perhaps it's time to change that," he replied. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the hum of conversation. Lucas, Drayton with his usual air of arrogance, appeared beside them, his fiancée trailing behind, wearing a smile sharp enough to wound Isabella. "What a surprise," he said, pretending to be delighted. "I see you found new company." Gabriel's eyes turned, cold, but his tone remained measured. "Good evening, Mr. Drayton. I believe we've crossed paths before your firm once proposed a joint venture with mine." Lucas forced a laugh. "The deal didn't align with your vision." "I recall." "That's correct," Gabriel replied. "I prefer partnerships built on integrity, not illusion." The air between them tightened. People nearby pretended to mingle, but their attention never left the trio. Lucas's smirk faltered just slightly, while Isabella stood silent, watching the quiet power struggle unfold. The orchestra began to play as the host announced the charity auction. Tonight's highlight item was a custom couture gown, donated by rising designer Isabella Hart. The crowd murmured in admiration as the gown was carried onto the stage, its silver threads catching every glimmer of light. Gabriel leaned closer. "Your art speaks, even when you don't." She turned her head, his words brushing against her skin like a secret. Bidding began, and to everyone's shock, the first voice to rise was Lucas's confident and loud 50,000. He called, raising his glass with a smirk. Clearly meant for her. The crowd gasped. The number doubled quickly as other bidders joined. But then another voice, deep, calm, and unwavering, cut through the noise. 200,000. Every head turned to Gabriel Cole. The host hesitated. "Sir, did I hear that correctly?" "You did?" Gabriel said, his gaze never leaving Isabella's face. Silence rippled across the room. Lucas's smile froze. The auctioneer brought down the gavel once twice sold to Mr. Gabriel Cole. Applause followed, but it sounded distant to Isabella. She could only hear the thunder of her own heartbeat. When the noise faded, Gabriel stepped closer to her, his tone low enough, for her alone talent deserves recognition. He said not ridicule. Lucas's jaw tightened, the light in his eyes shifting from arrogance to something darker. Envy, humiliation, rage. Isabella managed a quiet, "Thank you." But inside she was shaken. Not by the money, not by the attention, but by the quiet certainty in Gabriel's voice. As if he had just redrawn the balance of power in a single sentence, Lucas's fiancée whispered something in his ear, her expression brittle as glass. He turned away, pretending indifference. But his hands clenched at his sides, and everyone in that glittering ballroom saw it, the perfect man, cracking beneath the weight of his own pride. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Gabriel found Isabella by the fountain outside the ballroom. He held out a small velvet card embossed with his foundation's crest. "Tomorrow afternoon, my office," he said. "Your designs deserve the world to see them." She hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" He smiled faintly. Maybe I just like to invest in what's real, as she watched him walk away. The night air wrapped around her, filled with unspoken promise. But deep in the shadows near the exit, Lucas stood watching, his eyes burning with something dangerous, a plan forming behind his polished smile, and Isabella felt the first ripple of warning that the storm was far from over. The next day, the city was alive with headlines. Isabella Hart, the designer who turned humiliation into triumph. The photo of her standing beside Gabriel at the gala filled every screen. The story had gone viral. People called it the moment that silenced arrogance, the moment grace outshone money. She read the articles with disbelief, feeling as though she was watching someone else's life, not her own. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Journalists wanted interviews, brands wanted collaborations. Even old acquaintances who once ignored her sent messages of admiration. But behind every compliment she could feel the same curiosity. Who was she really? And why had Gabriel Cole chosen her? At noon she stood before the towering glass building of Cole Enterprises, her heart pounding as she entered the lobby. Everything gleamed polished marble. Golden light, quiet efficiency. She was led into an elevator that carried her to the top floor, where the city stretched out beneath clouds like a dream. Gabriel's office was filled with soft light walls of books, a single painting of the ocean. He greeted her with a smile that didn't belong to business, but to understanding. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I wanted to show you something." He led her toward a table covered in sketches, blueprints, and fabric swatches. "This is the proposal for the Cole Foundation's next project. We want to launch a line that funds scholarships for young designers. Your designs would lead the campaign." She blinked, unable to speak for a moment. "This is more than I ever imagined." He studied her quietly. "I didn't choose you for what happened last night. I chose you because I've seen hundreds of people in this industry chasing applause, and you're the only one who creates without it." His words reached deep somewhere. Old wounds had been buried. She looked out the window, her reflection merging with the skyline. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. You are," he said with quiet certainty. Their meeting ended with a handshake, but his touch lingered, warm, steady, grounding. She left the building feeling lighter, but as she stepped into the street, flashes erupted, cameras clicking, reporters shouting questions. Rumors were already spreading. Was she his muse? His lover? His next? Scandal. By evening, Lucas was in his office, the blinds drawn, his fiancée pacing behind him. The photo of Gabriel and Isabella was on every business site. Gabriel had humiliated him twice. First by rejecting his deal, now by taking his former fiancée's career and turning it into gold. His fiancée hissed, "You're letting them make a fool of you." He slammed his glass on the desk, enough she flinched but didn't stop. "Maybe you should have married her instead, Lucas." Her voice was cold. "At least then, you'd still be relevant." The words cut deeper than he expected. He watched her leave, slamming the door. And for the first time in years, Lucas felt fear. Not the fear of losing money, but of becoming invisible. He poured another drink, his mind racing. He knew how the world worked. Reputation could be destroyed faster than built, and he would not let Isabella or Gabriel stand over his ruin. Meanwhile, Isabella returned home to find a single envelope waiting on her doorstep. No name, only her address. Written in an unfamiliar hand, she hesitated before opening it. Inside was a photo of her standing with Gabriel, taken from a distance, and beneath it a message written in clean, deliberate script. "Not everyone watching wishes you well." She froze. The air seemed to thicken around her. Amelia found her moments later, pale and trembling. "What's wrong?" Isabella handed her the note. Her sister read it and swore softly. "This is a threat." Amelia said, "We have to tell someone no." Isabella whispered, "Maybe." It's nothing, but she knew it wasn't nothing. The edges of the photograph were too precise, the handwriting too controlled. It wasn't jealousy. It was warning that night sleep refused to come. The city outside glowed restless. Her phone buzzed. Again, a message from an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. She stared at the screen, a chill racing down her spine across town. Lucas watched the rain fall against his window. His reflection fractured in the glass. He had already made the call. Arrangements were in motion. He smiled coldly. Revenge didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it only needed to look like justice. And somewhere far above the glittering streets, Gabriel Cole sat alone in his penthouse reviewing files from a private investigator. The report on Lucas Drayton wasn't finished, but what he had read already confirmed his instincts. Lucas was not done trying to destroy what he had lost. Gabriel's gaze hardened. He whispered to himself, "Not this time. Not her." The city lights burned through the darkness, and 3 lives moved closer toward a collision none of them could yet see. The night was quiet, but beneath its calm, something dangerous was beginning to breathe. The following evening, the city's skyline shimmered like a crown of fire against the darkening sky. But for Isabella, the glow outside her window felt distant. She sat in her studio, surrounded by half-finished gowns. The note from the night before still lying on her table, its warning kept echoing in her mind. Not everyone watching wishes you well. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, but deep inside, she could feel that someone was moving pieces behind her back. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. This time it said, "You don't belong in his world." Before she could respond, Amelia stormed into the studio, clutching a folded newspaper. "Isabella, look at this." The front page showed a photo of Gabriel standing beside her, but the headline twisted. "Everything millionaires. Newest obsession ? Rumors of affair with rising designer shock investors." The story claimed she had used their relationship for personal gain. Isabella's knees went weak. Her voice broke. "This isn't true." Amelia held her shoulders. No, but lies spread faster than truth. Social media was exploding with comments, her name attached to words like opportunist and gold digger. Meanwhile, at Cole Enterprises, Gabriel faced his own storm. The board demanded explanations. Investors were nervous. One man, a smug executive named Reese, muttered, "She's a distraction, sir. This could damage our reputation." Gabriel's voice was cold and steady. "She's the only person here creating something worth our name. If you're worried about reputation, perhaps check your own before questioning hers." The room went silent. He left without another word. Later that night, Gabriel called Isabella, but she didn't answer. She sat on her couch, staring at the phone, torn between fear and pride. She couldn't let him see her like this, weak, scared, broken. Not again. Amelia urged her to pick up, but Isabella shook her head. "He deserves someone stronger. I'm not his problem." A knock interrupted them both, sharp, deliberate. She hesitated before opening the door. Gabriel stood there, rain on his coat, eyes darker than the night behind him. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You should have called me," he said softly. She tried to answer, but her throat tightened. "I didn't want to drag you into this." His jaw tightened. "You think this is your burden alone?" He stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Whoever is doing this won't stop until they break you. I won't let that happen." She felt the weight of his promise, but also the danger that came with it before she could respond. Amelia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and went pale. "Isabella, it's Lucas. He's holding a press conference tomorrow morning. He's going to accuse you publicly of stealing his design concepts." The words landed like a blade. The design accusations were false, but convincing enough to ruin her. She whispered, "How can he do this?" Gabriel's eyes darkened. "He can't, unless we let him." He pulled out his phone and made a call, his tone like ice. "This is Cole. I want everything on Drayton Holdings. I mean everything. After." He hung up. He turned back to her. His expression softened. "You've spent years surviving people like him. It's time you stop surviving and start fighting." Her breath caught in her chest. I don't know how he smiled faintly. "Yes, you do." You fight by standing tall. The next morning, the world watched as Lucas Drayton walked onto a stage. His smile polished his lies. Prepared flashes from cameras lit up the hall. He spoke with fake regret about betrayal, creative theft, and moral disappointment. But mid-sentence, the doors at the back of the room opened and Gabriel entered beside Isabella. The crowd turned like a tide. The cameras swiveled. The atmosphere cracked with tension. Lucas froze just long enough for Gabriel to speak. His voice carried across the room, steady like thunder echoing off stone. Before you continue your performance, Mr. Drayton, you should know the world already knows the truth. A screen lit up behind them displaying documents, financial records showing Lucas's company funneling fake charity funds, his face drained of color. Gasps rippled through the reporters. Gabriel's tone remained calm but lethal. Next time you try to destroy someone's name, make sure your own foundation isn't built on lies. Isabella stood beside him, her heart racing. Lucas tried to protest, but security moved in. Guided by evidence delivered earlier that morning, the same reporters who had once mocked her now shouted his name. In scandalas, they left the chaos behind. Isabella whispered, "I didn't know you would go that far." Gabriel looked at her, his eyes fierce and soft all at once. "I told you I don't play games. I protect what matters." That night the rain returned, falling hard against the city windows. She stood by the glass watching lightning split the sky. Gabriel joined her. His hand brushed hers, the air between them electric. She turned to him quietly. "What happens now?" He met her gaze with steady warmth. "Now," he said, "we build something honest, something no one can break again." For the first time in years, she believed it. The storm outside raged, but inside her something finally felt still. The next morning dawned pale and quiet, but the calm was deceptive beneath the surface. The city hummed with whispers. The downfall of Lucas Drayton had become the story of the week. Every news channel played the footage of Gabriel exposing the truth, while Isabella stood beside him, her face serene, her name suddenly transformed from scandal to symbol. She had gone from humiliation to hero overnight. Yet she didn't feel victorious. The attention was too loud, too bright. Every interview request felt like another intrusion. She wanted peace, not fame she had spent years designing in silence. And now her life was being narrated by strangers. The price of justice was exposure. Gabriel, however, moved through the chaos. Like a man born for it, his company's reputation soared. His decision to defend her publicly had made headlines of its own, but his eyes told a quieter story. When he looked at her, there was warmth, but also something unspoken, something that carried weight from his past. By afternoon, Isabella arrived at the Cole Foundation headquarters to discuss the scholarship project Gabriel had promised her. But when she entered his office, she found him speaking with two men from the press. His tone was polite but guarded once. They left. He closed the door behind them, his jaw tight. "They're digging into my past now," he said quietly. "They want to know why I care so much about you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then answered. "My wife died 5 years ago. The media never moved on from it. They called it the tragedy that made me a ghost for years. I didn't speak to anyone, not until now. His confession hit her with quiet force. She realized he wasn't just a powerful man protecting her. He was someone who understood, lost the kind that hollowed you out from within. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said. "I only regret that I let it make me cold until you reminded me what warmth feels like." She looked away, suddenly aware of how close they stood. His hand brushed hers almost by accident, but neither of them moved away. Their moment was interrupted by Amelia bursting through the door, her face pale. "Isabella, you need to see this." She turned her phone around. A live feed was playing Lucas standing outside. A courthouse flanked by his lawyer and cameras, though disgraced. He spoke with practiced sincerity, claiming he had been manipulated by both Gabriel and Isabella, that the documents revealed against him were stolen property. He was turning the story, again twisting it into something poisonous. Reporters were already picking it up, headlines flashing across screens: Gabriel Cole under investigation for data breach. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but a shadow crossed his eyes. He murmured, "He's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." That evening, Gabriel's private security advised him to stay low, but he refused. Instead, he met Isabella at her studio, determined to plan their next move. She looked exhausted. He told her she needed to rest. She refused. "I won't hide anymore." As they spoke, a sound echoed through the building, faint at first, then sharper, like glass. Breaking Gabriel's instincts took over. He grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a dividing wall. Seconds later, a brick crashed through the front window, landing on the floor with a thud, shards scattering across the tiles. Attached to it was a note written in the same clean script as before. "Stay away from him, or you'll regret it." Isabella's breath hitched. Gabriel picked up the note, his expression hard. "I should have known this would escalate." He called his head of security within minutes. The studio was surrounded by guards, but he didn't leave her side. Not once hours later when the police left, and the glass had been swept away. He finally spoke. "You're not safe here. Come with me. My place is secure." She hesitated. "You think this is Lucas. I know it is. But he won't stop until he gets what he wants. What he doesn't understand is that he already lost it." She followed him to his penthouse, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the glowing city. He poured her tea, his movements calm, controlled, but his eyes betrayed the storm underneath. As thunder rolled over the skyline, she finally asked the question that had haunted her since the beginning. "Why do you care so much?" Gabriel met her gaze. "Because once someone destroyed the life I loved, and I promised myself if I ever saw it happening again, I would stop it this time. I can." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his, the air between them heavy with unspoken promise. Lightning flashed outside, throwing shadows across their faces. It was no longer just a story of revenge or justice. It had become something deeper. Two people standing in the wreckage of what others tried to break, building something no one could touch. But as the night deepened, a figure watched from across the street through the rain-streaked glass. Lucas Drayton, unseen, phone in hand, voice cold as he spoke into it. "I told you this isn't over if she won't fall willingly. I'll make sure she does this time." Everyone will watch her break. The storm outside raged louder, and the battle that had started with words was about to turn into something far more dangerous. The morning after the riot of glass and threats, the city seemed smaller, as if the storm had drawn a line and separated what was safe from what was not. Isabella woke slow to light that leaked. Through blinds like cautious fingers, she moved through her studio with careful steps, as if the floor itself might whisper secrets to anyone who listened. The window where the brick had shattered held a jagged scar now covered with a temporary board and a promise of repairs. Amelia was already there, making coffee and forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We will get through this," she said, not as a hope, but as a plan. Isabella nodded and felt the weight of gratitude and fear braided together. Outside, the news vans still clustered like wounded birds along the curb, and the headlines had changed again from scandal to siege. Gabriel had spent the night scanning files and calling contacts until the sky paled. He arrived now without fanfare, stepping into the room with a quiet that felt like armor. His suit was rumpled and his eyes were rimmed with fatigue, but his voice was steady. "I found a pattern," he said, handing her a manila folder full of printouts and photographs. "Someone has been cultivating a narrative for months, and the same voices keep appearing in the margins." Isabella flipped through the pages with hands that trembled only a little. Each sheet was a thread, connecting paid posts and shadow accounts to a single account of influence that always turned conversation toward her in the worst light. "This is not random," he said lowly. "This is deliberate, and it smells like someone who wants control." not truth. They built a map together across the kitchen table. The lines connecting names and small companies like invisible roads to a larger scheme. Gabriel pointed to a cluster of shell corporations linked to one executive at Drayton Holdings. Lucas tries to hide in the prestige of his firm, but he has always hired people to do what his hands cannot bear to show. Isabella felt a cold clarity settle in her chest. She had played her life as if unaware of the chessboard, and now she saw the pieces moving with patient cruelty. "So what do we do?" she breathed. "We expose them," he answered simply. "And we do it in a way that cannot be spun into more lies." They set to work with a fierce tenderness, the way two people patch a roof during a storm. Amelia scoured legal filings while Gabriel tapped into quiet channels that moved faster than headlines. Isabella did what she did best. She created evidence of her craft from the raw materials of her life sketches and prototypes and dated notes. A quiet archive of the woman who had built her work from the ground up. They would not let a manufactured scandal erase years of labor and love. In the third hour, a courier arrived with a thin envelope and no return address. It felt familiar and small enough to contain a threat. Yet it carried something else. A single photograph folded carefully inside and on the back. A handwritten line that read, "We are watching close now." No punctuation, no flourish. Just the same measured threat they had seen before. Isabella did not cry. She folded the picture and set it into a drawer as if giving it a place diminished its power. Later that afternoon, she posted something on a small platform. She rarely used a photo of a sketchbook page messy with notes and stains. A caption that read, "Every stitch. Has a story ask me about. Yours?" The reaction was quiet at first, then like the tide. It rose. People began to reply with memories of workshops and altercations. Small kindnesses she had shown apprentices, a seamstress who credited her for saving her shop, a mentor who recalled Isabella buying fabrics in bulk so students could practice without shame. The chorus was made of ordinary voices, and it swelled into a sound that reporters could not ignore. The narrative was shifting, and the edges of a constructed lie began to blur in the evening. Lucas held a private meeting with a select group of investors, his face pale under the light of his phone, as lines of panic threaded the room. He had expected the attack to isolate her and force her into hiding. Instead, the world had started to see the person behind the photograph, and his tactics were losing air. "We can still move the story." He insisted, his voice sharp with the last edges of arrogance that had not yet been dulled by consequence. A woman across the table, who once admired him, nodded politely and said, "Maybe not. We need stability. Not spectacle now is not the moment to dig deeper into drama." The move was small, but it struck like frost across Lucas's plan back at the studio Gabriel and Isabella worked. Late into the night, they printed records and labeled dates, and traced the flow of funds until the map they had created looked like a city of proof. When they were done, Gabriel looked at her with a gravity that felt larger than both of them. "Does this frighten you?" she asked, not maliciously but honest to the bone. She thought of the brick through the window of her sanctuary. She thought of the way Lucas had laughed in that ballroom, and of the look he gave Gabriel when he could not control a man who did not need control. "I am afraid," she admitted, but something else rose with the fear. A quiet fierceness. "I am more afraid of letting them." When they sent a packet to a reporter known for digging and integrity. A careful thing with redactions for safety, but clear lines for prosecution by dawn. An investigative piece ran with the headline, "Lids lifted on coordinated smears directed at designers and young entrepreneurs, a network of influence meant to crush reputations for private gain." The article quoted emails and bank transfers, and the pattern was undeniable, in a corner office high above the city. Lucas read the story with a hand that shook. The bravest part of him had been not the money, but the stage, and now even that was slipping. He slammed his fist into the desk, and the sound was small and useless in the wide room outside. Rain started again, and this time it felt, to Isabella, like a cleansing, not a threat. She stood at her window with Gabriel beside her. the city reflected in glass and water. The world had not been fixed, but the lines were changing, and the next move belonged to them. Down below, a car idled, in shadow, and a figure watched the penthouse lights, then turned and walked away into the alleys, where decisions are made in whispers, and where some people still believe force will always conquer truth. The story would not end tonight. The danger had only changed shape. But inside Isabella something else had been set in motion. A force made of craft and witness, and the refusal to disappear. The city woke, restless headlines screamed justice exposed, while whispers filled every corridor of power. Lucas Drayton had vanished from sight. His firm frozen, his account seized, but power rarely dies quietly. It simply hides waiting for a softer target. And Isabella knew deep down that the silence around his name was not victory. It was warning. The morning light poured across the marble floor of Gabriel's penthouse, as Isabella reviewed new sketches for the scholarship project. Her pencil moved, but her mind refused to settle. She could still feel the tension in her bones, the weight of waiting. For something unseen, the press had turned her into a symbol of resilience. Yet she felt like a thread, stretched too thin, ready to snap. Gabriel entered with a phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp, concise. Then he hung up. His eyes found hers. Lucas resurfaced last night. Someone saw him leaving the country. No confirmation yet, but I know that look. He's planning something. She set her pencil down, her voice steady. What else did you hear that? He emptied his private offshore account and contacted an investigator, the kind who doesn't stop until they're paid to disappear. The room felt smaller. Suddenly her chest tight with a dread she tried to hide. "We've fought so hard," she said barely above a whisper. "When does it end? When people like him realize they can't feed on fear anymore." Gabriel answered quietly. Afternoon, the foundation's office was buzzing. Investors excited about her new line. The first prototypes glittered like hope reborn, and still her phone kept lighting up, with messages she ignored until one name froze her blood. Lucas. The screen flashed once, then faded. A single message lingered in her inbox. 3 words, remember. The Galash stared at it for a long time. The memory sharp, the humiliation, the laughter, the way he looked at her like she was beneath him. Now she wasn't sure if the message was a taunt or a promise. That evening, Gabriel took her to a quiet restaurant tucked away from the city's noise. The walls warm, the light dim. He wanted peace, for one night, just 1 hour away from headlines and danger. But peace never travels far from war. As they sat down, Gabriel's security chief rushed in his face. "Pale sir, there's been a breach at the foundation. Someone hacked our archive. They took designs, internal files, everything related to the scholarship line." Isabella's heart dropped. "Lucas," she whispered, "it has to be him. He's trying to destroy everything again." Gabriel's expression hardened, but his tone remained controlled then. "We rebuild again stronger." But he knew it wasn't just theft. It was declaration. Hours later at the penthouse, he worked beside her, every security team on alert when the power flickered. Lights dimmed, then returned. She looked up, frightened. A voice echoed from the intercom, smooth, cold, deliberate. "I told you this wasn't over." Gabriel moved instantly, shutting down the system, but the voice lingered as if carved into air. Lucas's tone was smug. "You took everything from me now. Watch what happens. When I take it back, then." The line went dead. Sirens screamed outside. Minutes later, police surrounded the street below, but the damage was already done. Their systems compromised, files erased, only paper records remained. Isabella sat on the couch. Trembling, she whispered, "I can't keep doing this. He's turning every victory into a wound." Gabriel knelt before her, his voice fierce. "He's doing this because he knows you've already beaten him. Don't let fear rewrite your truth." He placed a small velvet, Box on the table, not with ceremony, but defiance inside, was a simple ring. Nothing extravagant. A design she recognized her own from sketches she'd made months earlier. "How did you?" He smiled faintly. "You left it in your notebook." "I thought it deserved to exist." She touched it, fingers shaking. "What is this?" he said. "What?" "It's always been. Proof that creation is stronger than destruction." Before she could respond, the phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Lucas. It was the police they had found. His car near the river engine still warm, but no driver. His phone smashed beside it. Gabriel listened in silence, then hung up. "He's gone," they said. "Maybe he ran. Maybe he drowned." Isabella exhaled, but her relief was thin, like glass. "He's not gone," she whispered. "Men like him don't vanish. They wait." Gabriel reached for her hand. "Then we'll wait too." Not in fear, but ready. The city outside burned bright against the dark, and somewhere deep within its endless lights, a single figure moved unseen, watching the towers that carried his name fade from glory into shadow. Lucas Drayton was not finished, and the story that began in laughter was drawing toward a reckoning where everything built on pride would finally crumble. And beneath that looming storm, Isabella's voice steadied again. She whispered to herself, "I won't run from him anymore." And for the first time, the fear in her chest turned into fire. The night stretched heavy over the city. The river below reflected 1,000 lights, but none of them could reach the shadows moving along its edge. The air felt charged, as if something long promised was about to break. Isabella couldn't sleep. She stood by the window of Gabriel's penthouse, watching the skyline pulse like a living thing. Her reflection stared back at her. Not the woman who had once been humiliated at a gala, but someone harder and braver, yet still carrying a quiet ache of fear. Deep inside, Gabriel joined her, silent as always. His presence warm behind her. He said softly, "I received a call. An hour ago they found traces of Lucas's digital trail near the Foundation servers. Whoever helped him is still inside the system." She turned to him, her eyes wide. "You mean someone close to us?" "Yes," he said, "and I intend to find out what Dawn." The office buzzed with tension, every employee summoned to a confidential audit. Gabriel's security chief ran checks on every access log, every file, every message by noon. They found it an assistant, one of Lucas's former interns, still working quietly under a new name. She was gone. Her workstation wiped clean, but she had left behind one encrypted file titled Gala Chat Retribution. Gabriel's analyst tried to open it the moment the code cracked. A video played on every screen across the building. Lucas's face appeared calm, smiling confident as ever, his voice smooth as silk. "You thought you won, Isabella. But revenge is an art, not a moment. If I cannot rise, then I will drag your truth down with me." The feed cut to footage edited from the gala that infamous night, twisted to make her look complicit in his fraud. The media seized it within minutes. The same networks that had crowned her. A hero turned suspicious headlines exploded again. Lucas's ghost returns. The truth behind the designer and the billionaire. Gabriel slammed his fist against the desk. His calm shattered. This is how he works. He poisons faith. Isabella stood frozen, her heart pounding. She whispered, "I can't let him destroy you because of..." He turned sharply. "Don't you dare take the blame for his lies again. This time we end it." That evening, Gabriel called a press conference, one that mirrored the first gala. Same ballroom, same chandeliers, same crowd. The place where humiliation had begun would now hold its reckoning. Isabella didn't want to face it, but he looked at her, with quiet conviction. The only way to kill a lie is to walk straight through it. She nodded and stepped into her silver gown, the same one from that night. Only, this time she wasn't trembling. The cameras flashed as they entered together. Lucas was not there, but his influence lingered in every whisper. Gabriel took the stage first, speaking with steady precision about truth integrity and how easily beauty can be twisted by envy. Then he turned to her and said, "Miss Hart, the floor is yours." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. She could hear her pulse, the weight of every eye upon her. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I was once humiliated in this room. I thought silence would protect me. That dignity meant walking away. But silence only feeds cruelty tonight. I speak not as a victim, but as a creator. You can destroy a name, but you cannot erase the work behind it." She lifted a remote, and behind her the screen filled with evidence. Months of proof, emails, receipts, dates, and signatures, each one unmasking Lucas's manipulation and the network he built. The crowd gasped. Reporters scrambled. Flashes erupted. Gabriel stood beside her, a steady pillar, as the truth unfolded by morning. Lucas Drayton's empire collapsed again this time. Completely, authorities tracked him to a private airstrip. His last attempt at escape ended in handcuffs. His face appeared on the news. Not as a powerful man, but as a warning. Isabella watched the broadcast from her studio. Weeks later, the world had quieted the noise, fading back to whispers. Her designs now funded programs for young artists like her who had been dismissed for dreaming too small. Gabriel entered carrying 2 coffees and that soft smile that had once steadied her through storms. He said, "People keep asking what's next." She smiled without looking up from her sketchbook. "The same thing it's always been to build." He stepped closer. "What about us?" She looked at him, the answer already in her eyes. "We already started." "Didn't we?" He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwined. Sunlight pouring through the wide windows, touching the world they had rebuilt together, down by the river where the city's noise softened to whispers. Lucas's car still sat, impounded, silent, and empty, a relic of a man who had tried to own everything, but lost the one thing he could never buy: peace. And far above the noise of it all, Isabella finally breathed free. Her story had begun in mockery, but it ended in light. The woman who once stood alone in humiliation now stood beside the man who believed in her, and together they had proven that power built on cruelty crumbles, while love